Another day, another Owen Jones related scandal on Twitter. And yet, the sweet release of death never comes. This time, it's because Gary Lineker, Match of the Day pundit and crisp aficionado, committed the cardinal sin of sharing an interview that Owen Jones conducted with Raz Sigal, an Israeli associate professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Stockton University. In the interview, Segal cites international law and historical precedent to argue that what's going on in Gaza is a, quote, textbook genocide. Here's an example of his reasoning.
Now, the case of Israel's attack on Gaza is actually very unique. It's actually exceptional, I think, in a number of ways, but it's unique in the sense of discussing it as what I think it is, that is genocide, because the intent is so clearly articulated, right? And it's articulated throughout Israeli media and society and politics now. And anyone who follows Hebrew language sources is exposed to shocking language by members of parliament, by journalists, on social media, in public spaces, calling to annihilate Gaza, to destroy Gaza, to flatten Gaza, to kill everyone, so on and so forth. But it's articulated since the 7th of October, actually, by people with what's called in international law command authority, right, or command responsibility. That is state leaders, members of the war cabinet, and senior army officers. And here we have dozens of pieces of evidence so far of people with command authority, and we can, we can name a few key examples in a second. But I want to just emphasize also that the issue of intent here, there's two additional things that are important to note. One is that it also comes in the Israeli case with a lot of dehumanizing language, right? And we'll refer to that. So there's intent to destroy, but the intent to destroy here is also accompanied with explicit dehumanizing language. And then there is a language that actually should get us to think about historical cases of genocide. I'm referring specifically to, for example, ideas about deporting all the Palestinians in Gaza to the desert, right? Because we know that deserts actually have been used in genocides historically in the 20th century specifically as weapons of genocide.
Now, you can agree or disagree with that, but it's undeniably a sober and well-researched bit of thinking from a scholar who is laying out their reasoning in detail. No wonder then that Gary Lineker thought it was a valuable resource to share with his 8.9 million followers on Twitter. Cue, of course, right-wing Meltdown. This was Jake Wallace-Simons, editor of the Jewish Chronicle on Twitter. BBC, we've really been undermining our own credibility in recent weeks. Gary Lineker, hold my beer. Not to be outdone, Michael Deacon slammed Gary Lineker in The Telegraph. Gary Lineker is making an utter fool of himself over Israel. The BBC star's latest endorsements prove that he must stop tweeting about current affairs once and for all. And here's the ever sober and restrained Brendan O'Neill writing for Spiked Online after having combed through Gary Lineker's Twitter feed for any mention of Israel prior to his tweet of Owen Jones's video. Now Mr. Lineker is not so quiet. Now he invites his millions of followers to watch a prof accuse Israel of genocide. So this is the virtue of the virtue signalers. When racist terrorists carry out the worst act of anti-Semitic slaughter of modern times, they go dumb. When the victim of that racist slaughter dares respond, they pipe up. The inversion of morality taking place here is mind-bending. Hamas is a genuinely genocidal terror movement that frequently gives voice to its apocalyptic racial animus for the Jews and its desire to erase Israel. And yet it is Israel's war against Hamas that is branded genocidal. The idea that hunting genocidal terrorists is genocide is an act of despicable doublethink. Now, it's not the hunting of Hamas that people are calling genocidal. It's the death toll of civilians, thousands of children killed by airstrikes, those still trapped under the rubble, and all of the civilian infrastructure that's been targeted, from bakeries to hospitals to the downing of power lines. These are all things which indicate an indiscriminate attack. And now, when it comes to genocide, the language of genocide is coming from people with command responsibilities. It's coming from the war cabinet. It's coming from IDF leaders. They're calling to erase Gaza, to flatten Gaza, to drive the Palestinians out of the enclave and into neighboring countries. Those are calls for genocide and for ethnic cleansing. It's not the idea that there's a war going on between combatants that has people upset. Now, the Times report that BBC staff internally were argued by Lineker sharing the link to the interview with Raz Segal. They write, the post caused dismay among BBC staff. One raised concerns that it would be bloody awful for any Jewish colleagues that have to work with Lineker. It's pretty shit for any Jew having to work with quite a few folk here right now, they added. Lineker's post prompted an internal debate about whether he had breached the BBC's social media guidelines, which were overhauled after his criticism of Suella Braverman, in which he compared the government's immigration policy to 1930s Germany. The guidelines say that all staff should respect high standards of civility and refrain from attacking political parties or politicians. One BBC journalist said that they believed Lineker had breached the guidelines. He's not respecting Jewish colleagues and amplifying really offensive accusations of genocide, they said. The BBC code is about not doing things that are offensive to others, which this clearly is. People feel it's absolutely disgraceful, and the Director General needs to deal with it. Now, this might sound a bit weird, but I actually have more respect for Brendan O'Neill here than the unnamed BBC staff quoted by The Times, because O'Neill, to his credit, is at least raising political objections. Now, they're ones that I disagree with wholeheartedly, and I disagree with them because it frames what Israel is doing in Gaza as self-defense. But it is at least within the realms of debate. You have one point of view, I have another point of view. What's happening in the Times article is an attempt to shut down any speech, no matter how sober, no matter how well researched, that's critical of Israel by claiming that it's anti Semitic. And look how comically low the threshold is. It's disrespectful to Jewish BBC staff. And note here how Jewish is used as a synonym with pro Israel. To merely say that it's worth watching an interview with an Israeli historian calling out the government's actions as genocidal. Now, that would be like if I said that I felt uncomfortable as a Muslim member of staff because one of my Novara media colleagues had shared an article condemning Saudi Arabia for human rights abuses and demanding they get disciplined for it. It's cheap, it's cynical, and it tries to shortcut winning an argument by simply saying that it shouldn't be had at all. You can't say that simply because someone could find something offensive, that it's a breach of impartiality and it's in itself racist. People may get offended. That doesn't mean that the objection is in itself reasonable. You have to look at the content. And the content here was an Israeli historian saying, according to his interpretation of law and his interpretation of historical precedent, that what's going on in Gaza is a textbook case of genocide. And the content of Gary Lineker's tweet, all it said is that watching the video was worth 13 minutes of your time and you could make up your own mind. Now, if you find that offensive, in my personal view, you gotta get a grip. Helena, when I was looking at how this story played out, I wondered if the unspoken bit here is that Gary Lineker treated Owen Jones, who's very obviously on the left, as though he's a legitimate participant in the public sphere. Do you think that's got something to do with the brouhaha?
So every time I click my fingers, we lose another one of the Liberal commentariat to the unfortunate affliction known as Owen Jones derangement syndrome. You too can join Novara Media for as little as £1 a month to help us find a cure for Owen Jones derangement syndrome, allow these people to have normal takes on these issues without losing their goddamn minds on Twitter. Now, this has been quite a week for Owen Jones. He's been through the absolute ringer with the way in which people have been dealing with his comments over the current Israel-Palestine conflict. And obviously, of course, you mentioned that this is actually an Israeli historian, a scholar of genocide studies and the Holocaust in specific. If Gary Lineker was just sharing this person expressing their opinions out of the context of Owen Jones, there would no one at all would have been having any of the reaction they've had right now. But the fact that Owen Jones did the tweet and is on screen, despite the fact that he says nothing throughout all 13 minutes of that, because it's being done by an actual academic scholar, that's the only reason why they're getting mad about this, the fact that Owen Jones is included in it at all. Now, this isn't the only time this week where Owen Jones has been attacked for something that he's put out on the internet about the Israel-Palestine conflict. So I'm just going to go over a few of the things that people have got mad about Owen Jones on Twitter about. The first one was when a Taliban parody account was in his replies. People were trying to claim that he was somehow being agreed with by the Taliban. He retweeted somebody else, quote tweeting Der Spiegel, saying that the kind of anti-Semitism we're seeing is something that we've never seen before. And as an Israeli, as a Jewish person saying, you a German magazine saying we've never seen any type of this anti-Semitism before? Are you sure about that? And then apparently Owen Jones retweeting him was somehow saying that this wasn't anti-Semitism and not indeed what he was actually saying. Was the opinion that was being retweeted there was the fact that yes, there's been plenty of anti-Semitism in Germany. It was the hotbed of anti-Semitism for one specific instant in the last century. Then after that, he tweeted out a video of Al-Shifa Hospital where the security footage showed members of the Hamas militant groups bringing in hostages for treatment. And people then thought that he was saying that Hamas was some humanitarian institution just looking after people because that's their duty, and not indeed picking up on the fact, a literal Oxford professor, no less, couldn't pick up on the fact that maybe the Hamas would not have any use for the hostages if they died, right? The leverage kind of disappears there. So they thought that Owen Jones was being positive about Hamas and not giving some kind of neutral discussion on the reason as to why there would be hostages being treated in Al-Shifa. And then the most surreal point of all of this, an ex-Labour MP quote tweeted Owen Jones saying to Dan Hodges that maybe it's bad when children die, then added The Guardian saying that Owen Jones should be fired. This man breaks people's brains. None of the takes that he's given here are in any way objectionable. Yeah, how dare Owen Jones care about dead children? What a monster, right? How dare he bring on an Israeli academic to talk about what, to anybody who has eyes and who can articulate themselves, who can look at evidence in front of them and see that under any definition, what Israel is doing is at least ethnic cleansing, if not a genocide. And then they just lose their minds because Owen Jones is doing it. Why they lose their minds? Is it because he still radiates twink energy at age 39? I have no idea. That could be, other than that, the only other explanation, the more likely one probably, is that they managed to browbeat anybody who represents the genuine left out of political discourse, apart from Owen Jones. He's the only one who's escaped their ire. And he is a constant thorn in their side, providing a different analysis than their received wisdom within the liberal commentariat. One last comment I would make, though, about that spiked article by Brendan O'Neill. You'd think somebody writing in an online journal that used to be called Living Marxism might want to take a more materialist analysis of the situation in Israel and Palestine, and that maybe it's very difficult to equivocate between an established country with one of the most advanced militaries in the Middle East carrying out an occupation for 75 years and a blockade who brutalizes many innocent people with complete impunity. Might be not indeed equivocal, whilst the actions of October the 7th by Hamas and PIJ are utterly indefensible. The idea that somehow that means that you therefore can't call out Israel for engaging in far worse materially than what Hamas and PIJ did on October 7th over the course of the last 75 years seems a bit of a misstep, considering the roots of the publication that Brendan O'Neill is writing in there. Just a thought.
I was really disappointed to see so many comments in the YouTube chat making fun of Owen Jones' derangement syndrome. It's a real disease, it's very serious, and there's no known cure. But we at Novara Media are carrying out tireless research to find a vaccine. And if you want to support that crucial work, go to novaramedia.com/support and become a supporter. We ask for an average of 1 hour of your wage per month or as much as you can afford. And maybe, one day, together, we can find a cure for liberal commentariat brain rot.